saw clearly where Jesus speaks and the clarity with which he speaks to he who marries someone who is divorced commits adultery. He who divorces and remarries commits adultery. So he equates any sort of sexual activity outside of marriage as extreme as adultery, condemned in the Ten Commandments. And of course I said in all of this, my desire, and I think the church's desire, is to view it with the eyes of God. To be able to view marriage truly as God sees it. And that if there is truly a bond there in marriage that has been united not only in nature but also through the Spirit of God, that the church would be able to see that and bless it and to be able to lead that couple to the truth of what that means, that they have made these promises together. So whenever we come into annulments, we're talking about the role of the church. That is not just a churchy divorce court. It's the role of the church in granting annulments is that what might look like a marriage and even be considered one by society may be illicit or unlawful according to God, and thus not a real marriage. And so as the church tries to look at this bond that might appear to be a bond between a couple, the church investigates, were they really able to enter into the bond of marriage? And so what does the church investigate? Insufficient use of reason. Maybe there were things that kept them from being able to be fully there, like a mental illness or something like that. Ignorance about the nature of marriage. We talked about this last time. If you don't realize that marriage is between a man or a woman, then you're not able to really enter into it. If you don't realize it is for life, you're not able to really enter into it. And so what looks like a marriage actually wasn't, because what you promised wasn't truly the promise of marriage. Fraud, if you say you're someone, but meanwhile, you're actually addicted to gambling and get addicted to drugs, and all of a sudden you're not actually entering into this union with another person because you're not actually giving all of yourself in all of that. Willful exclusion of children. Maybe you didn't, from the very beginning, ever intend to have children. That's a serious problem. And that would, in the church's eyes, keep you from being able to enter into marriage, which by its nature is open to children. Or you didn't plan to be faithful. You didn't plan to remain with this one person forever. Maybe there was force. Maybe there was fear involved. All of these things that would keep one from entering into what we talked about in the weeks leading up to this, the free, total, faithful, fruitful love that bonds a man and a woman together for life. So what's all the fuss about? It's a really long process. And why should one go through all of it? And it can be grueling, and it can take a long time going back and finding witnesses. And why go through all of this? Well, first of all, the church wants there to be a clarity in conscience. And then if you weren't really married, the church wants to give you that freedom to know that it's not that you didn't love the person. It's not that that wasn't a real love. But it wasn't a true indissoluble bond. And so if you want to enter into a new union, you can have the freedom by going through this process that is involved. But hopefully there's healing as well to be able to bring you to that freedom. And then finally to be reconciled to God. All right? And no matter what happens, it's truly an opportunity to have that healing and to come back into full union with God and with His church. It was a brief sweep-through overview, trying to fill in from last week. Any questions about any of that? There's so many nuances and qualifications, and yet that's the... I did promise to touch just a little bit on communion. So those who are in a situation where they're civilly divorced and remarried, it's a pretty hot topic right now in the church, and whether or not those who are in these civil unions after being married in the church, can they receive communion? I think one of the problems today, one of the things that makes it really hard, is that today at Mass, everyone comes up for communion. Fascinatingly enough, if you go to any of the churches in Europe and Rome, you realize the pews aren't nailed down into the floor. Pews are actually a Protestant invention. That up until the 1500s, you went into a Catholic church and there were no pews. You weren't there to be entertained. You weren't there to hear a great homily and hear great music. And then there weren't ushers who were then going to usher everybody up in that pew, such that if you decided, I'm not ready to receive the Lord right now, it was really awkward because people had to climb over you and stuff, and you just felt shameful. No, you were there and you were worshiping together with the priest. And at the time of communion, those who were prepared internally to receive the Lord would come up to the communion rail, and in a spirit of piety and reverence, they would kneel down and receive communion that way. And so today, it's if you don't go up to communion, it's you didn't go to Mass, which is just really unfortunate, because you don't need to receive communion to go to Mass. And so often, we're not in a state ready to receive communion, and that we still feel this pressure. Oh, I gotta go up. I gotta get something. I gotta get my Jesus. And that's just really the wrong way to look at the Mass, as there really ought to be an internal readiness for it. So those who are in a state of being divorced and civilly remarried are objectively in a state that keeps them from being able to receive the Lord in good conscience. And John Paul II was really clear on this. Pope Benedict was really clear on this, trying to encourage those who are in this place to be reconciled, to grow to a place where then they can receive the Lord in good conscience and an internal preparedness. Pope Francis has kind of made this a little fuzzy, and here's the most positive interpretation of it. He doesn't want these black and white norms of, if you're in a state of being divorced and remarried, you can't go and receive it, as a way that then priests can just clear that couple or that person off the desk and say, nope, not now, until you're living as brother and sister, or until you've gone through the annulment, until whatever, then you can come back and see me. Pope Francis wants the priests and wants the church to dive into that person, because that is a person there who's been wounded, been hurt by sin and by everything else. And so to enter into journey with that person and to bring them to a place where they can come to be healed, to be reconciled with God, so that then they can come forward to receive communion. So it's about, ultimately, protecting the dignity of the sacrament, that Jesus is truly present there, and also respecting the dignity of the person and who they are. Jumping over a lot. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? All right. My last year in Rome, we're just going to jump from one topic to the next. My last year in Rome, I had the opportunity to write a thesis to finish out my degree. And as I shared with some of you earlier, I was studying at the Pope St. John Paul II Institute on Marriage and Family. And so I was praying a lot on what to write my final thesis paper on. And what the Lord really put on my heart was contraception. And realizing just how many people today don't hesitate. They take the pill just as often as they take Advil. And in their minds, there's no difference. And just to see how what's been sadly accepted by many, just as many in the church as outside of the church, and even by as many priests and bishops who haven't been courageous in speaking up. John Paul II was very courageous in speaking up. And for him, this wasn't like an added topic that he added on to the end of his works. At the end of the Theology of the Body, he says something really interesting. This was all leading up to give a clear defense of the church's teaching against contraception. Defending Pope Paul VI's Humanae Vitae statement, where he backed up the church's teaching on why contraception is wrong. And so for him, in John Paul II's pontificate, this was this huge issue. And so I just wanted to dive in and appreciate what's his perspective, where is he coming through? So I wrote 100 pages on contraception, and it was a long year, and it's made for some interesting conversations whenever people are like, hey, so what'd you write your thesis on? And it's like, why contraception is wrong? And most people are like, oh. No more questions after that. So I appreciate that it is a sensitive topic because it's so widely accepted, and unfortunately because also it's been so damaging, and most of us don't even realize it. Here's a little piece of the historical background to contraception. In short, for the majority of Christianity, the church's teaching was clear, that the church is pro-life. Pro-life, and most of us think like, oh yeah, pro-life, like anti-abortion, abortion is wrong. But pro-life meaning like, no, even the sexual act is meant to be open to life, each and every one. And so from scripture to St. Augustine in the 4th century, there's this St. Martin in the Penitentials in the 6th century, St. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, all the way up to Pope Pius XI in the 20th century. All this consistent teaching on seeing contraception as being wrong. Anything that would interrupt the life-giving conjugal act. That is until August 15th, 1930. There was this really significant conference. The Anglicans came together in 1930, and by a vote of 193 to 67, they voted to allow contraception. They said it was okay. In really certain and grave situations, they said, they limited it, and yet they still opened up the door. And all of a sudden, it was a landslide. And after the Anglicans, then it was the Methodists, and then it was the Presbyterians, and then every single other major Protestant denomination accepted it. Some in broad strokes, others in limited cases, but they all opened up the door for it. And in many ways, it was like boom, 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 and it was like the church that was remaining. And all eyes kind of looked to the Catholic Church and like, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to change your teaching too? Are you going to change what has been widely accepted for over 1900 years? And at that point in time, Pope John the 23rd, Pope St. John the 23rd, called together a conference of theologians, bishops, experts on areas of human life, of sociology, and all these different aspects, and said, I want you to investigate this. I want you to look into it. And they started having these debates and looking at the arguments, pro and for, and maybe this is totally uninteresting to you, but I was captivated by it. Because the majority of the people of this conference that John the 23rd assigned gave reasons why the church should allow it. And this was called the Majority Report. And so the Majority Report was given to now Paul VI, because John the 23rd had passed away. Paul VI, and so he receives this Majority Report of theologians, bishops, priests saying, yeah, I think we should consider it. And the Minority Report that said, no, we can't. We need to stay strong. We need to hold fast to the church's teaching. In the midst, before Paul VI released Humanae Vitae, the Majority Report was released. It was made public. They're really like, we get upset now with like all the blogs and different things that like leak things from the Vatican now. It was happening then too. And so all of a sudden then like word gets out, and it was just mass confusion. In the midst of all this, there was a young Polish bishop, Karol Wojtyła, who came in to see Paul VI. And you know what he said? You have to follow the Minority Report. You have to follow the Minority Report. You have to stick with the Minority Report that holds true to the free, total, faithful, fruitful love between a man and a woman in each and every act. And in large part, Pope Paul VI listened exactly to John Paul II, the future John Paul II. And he wrote his encyclical, Humanae Vitae. And here's what he said. But the church, which interprets natural law through its unchanging law, must be obeyed and teaches that it is necessary that each conjugal act remain ordained in itself to the procreating of human life. And then he also says there is an unbreakable connection between the unitive meaning and the procreative meaning of the conjugal act. and both are inherent in the conjugal act. So there's a lot to be said there. In brief, especially in this Humanae Vitae 12, he says that there's the unitive meaning, that when a man, a husband and a wife come together, in the sexual act, they're united in their persons. In a loving way, they give themselves to one another. And in that love, their love is intensified and made stronger. We had the duct tape example last week of seeing the biological reality of that. That's true, but even in the fullness of their life, they're brought even more united into a single life. Hopefully that life that brings them to heaven. But then also there's a second meaning to that, because it's not just about a loving union that brings together two people in a fulfilling way, but also one that's open to life. And the biological reality bears this out. A man and a woman have half of a procreation system, a reproductive system, that's what it's called. And so that reality is seen, and it's the institution of marriage that protects that reality. And so Paul VI said that those need to be united each and every time. In a lot of ways, this has been made really difficult, because at the same time, the pill was being distributed all over the place with these really strong promises of happiness. And at the time, there were all these talks of the social problems that would be solved by contraception. Talk about reduced problems such as overpopulation and pregnancy out of wedlock. Right? Those are real problems. Well, the overpopulation was a bit of a myth that was busted later. But pregnancy out of wedlock, yeah, that's a real problem. And so the thought is, well, if you give them contraception, if you teach them, right? If only we were to inform our youth about what it means to use contraception, then they wouldn't be getting pregnant out of wedlock. And so this is kind of seen as the answer, that if we give them this, if we teach them this, then they would reduce the problem. It would enhance married life by taking away the fear of pregnancy. You can see that's, in many cases, a real problem because of financial reasons, because of business burdens, because of even career aspirations. All of a sudden, children can come in and really be a burden. And so all of a sudden, contraception is introduced as, this will help you. This will solve the problems. And go all the way down the list, especially as women's rights and the great feminism movement that was arising too. This was seen as their freedom. But instead of a freedom for, it was really a freedom from your reproductive ability, a freedom from being tied to home, a freedom from raising children and giving life. Did these promises bear out? One of the books that has meant a lot to me has been Adam and Eve After the Pill by Mary Eberstadt. I would highly recommend it. It's a fascinating read because basically it looks into all of the ironies of the sexual revolution. All of the promises, greater sexual freedom, greater sexual happiness, greater fulfillment in marriage, all if you inherit the pill and the use of contraception to have control over when you will have babies or if you don't want to have babies at all. And meanwhile, then the irony is more sexual freedom. No, people are actually more enslaved to not actually being able to have as many sexual encounters as was promised. I don't know if you guys realize this. There's somewhat of an epidemic. Sexless marriages that are a real thing now. That has actually been, there are articles written on it, that there are a lot of marriages where the couples aren't having sex. And why is that? Because all the stats show that in increasing rates, actually since the sexual revolution. I won't give you the answer right now, but it's an interesting thing to think about, that the promise was greater and more availability to have sex whenever you want, and yet meanwhile, actually less. If you look at the stats, those couples who don't use contraception, who use natural family planning, actually have sex on average more than those who use contraceptive means. So Paul VI, in this great document, I encourage you to read it. it's actually not that long, Humanae Vitae, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful in the way he appreciates this is a serious issue. And it's not just as easy as like condemning it, contraception is wrong, but to really take seriously the person and the situation that that person finds themselves in, and the marital statuses and all of that. And so there are so many ways to talk about this, and as I only have an hour, I'm going to look at a certain part of Humanae Vitae where he actually speaks as a prophet. Maybe not intentionally, but he does. And he says, if contraception is accepted on a widespread level, there are 4 things that will take place, will be unfortunate consequences and side effects. And so I just want to look at each of those, and we'll see if what he said back in 1968, 49 years ago, we're going to come up on the 50th anniversary of Humanae Vitae, July 25th, 2018, that's it. So next summer, it'll be 50 years from then. So it'll be fascinating to look at the different works that we'll look at. Where were we 50 years ago, and where are we today? So here's what he said. Here was his first prophecy. He said the widespread use of contraception would lead to conjugal infidelity and the general lowering of morality. What's your first impression of that, I guess? Seems like kind of a, I don't know, like, all right, bold prophecy there, Pope Paul VI. But can we see ways that he's been prophetically true and really predicted? No, okay, if we accept this, we're going to go down this path. Now, obviously, there are so many factors, and so to say that it's contraception that caused all these things, okay. But is it a significant contributor to a total change of the vision of the human person, of sexuality, of marriage, of the conjugal act? I think if we take an honest look, we see that yes, 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 yes. So, conjugal infidelity, divorce rate is just soaring through the roof more and more. And so what do? We put out TED Talks about how we should go to monogamous marriages that are somewhat open because it's just falling apart. Like, no, stop! Like, go back to what it actually is meant to be. Cohabitation. One of the hardest things is to, as a priest, talk to couples who come seeking marriage and are already living together. And even if they're not living together, most likely they're already sexually active. And so to talk to them, and if you talk to priests, as I do, they're my only friends now. Hey, Father, like, what do you see? And they'll tell you, especially the priests who have been around, like, just the steady increase, where now it is rare to find any couple that comes to you wanting to get married that are not already sexually active, that aren't already living together. It wasn't like that, they'll tell you, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And now, many priests are wanting to give up. Well, there's nothing you can do about it. And yet, there's so much to be able to speak to in terms of what being sexually active does to the union before you get married. Dr. Janet Smith is a great author and has really been outspoken against contraception. And she looks at a great study that evaluates what changes in a woman whenever she's on the pill. That there are actually hormones that are emitted that even that aren't consciously registered, subconsciously, we're aware of them. And that actually a man and a woman will be attracted to one another, not just through sight, not just through sound, but actually through smell. And that smell is emitted, you all smell, whether you know it or not. And it's based largely in part based on your hormones. And we can be strongly attracted to different people based on these hormones. And so Janet Smith has looked at and really brought to the forefront the fact that, especially a woman, whenever she's on the pill, her hormones change drastically. Is all of a sudden, what does the pill do? Well, in a sense, it's a pseudo sense of being pregnant. And as any of you women who are mothers know, your hormones change drastically whenever you're pregnant. And so all of a sudden, those hormones change. And there have been different studies that show that different people that are attracted to certain scents, all of a sudden, whenever a woman is on the pill, her hormones change, and that scent changes. And so people are then all of a sudden being attracted to someone different than they would before she was on the pill. And so what does this mean? Not totally conclusively, and yet pretty strongly seen, we can tell people are being attracted to people that we wouldn't normally be attracted to because of the pill. And so what does this mean for when a priest is talking to a couple, or when anyone is talking to a couple who just doesn't even think about it? They're going to cohabitate, they're going to sleep together before marriage. To really invite them, this is my task or my approach, is to challenge them to abstain. Why? For many reasons, but one, so that you can truly know. You can truly know that this is the person that you're attracted to. And if she's on the pill, to invite her to get off the pill. There are also studies that are showing just the massive amounts of hormones that are being pumped into our water. There are studies that show that fish are being radically feminized based on the large amount of hormones that are being pumped in through our water and sewage systems. So in a world that is all about like being eco-friendly, being green, first of all, we don't hesitate to pump the hormones into the water, into the sewage, but even into our own bodies. So there are a lot of contradictions here. And so I think the invitation is to help people to see the invitation to take the time seriously, to make sure that you're attracted to the person for the right reason. We have pornography, we have abortion, that all of a sudden, talk about that being just like soaring through the roof statistically. I think in large part because it's being used now as a backup contraceptive means. That if the contraceptive fails, all of a sudden abortion is the backup plan. Any thoughts on that before we move on to the second prophecy about the moral decline or about infidelity? Yeah.
Well, only comment that the doctor who worked with Dr. John to develop the pill very late in life regretted his work in that field. And that a popular program like Dr. Oz a few years ago recognized the effect on the water supply, and the comment was the real sadness of it is that science does not know how to eliminate the estrogen from the water supply. So, your comments, we think are very well taken. We don't really realize
Yeah.
what the effect the sexual revolution has been on our personal lives.
Yeah, in a lot of ways it's overlooked, and just think about how so much in the pornographic culture, it's all the movies, all the music, it all promotes the hookup culture without showing any of the side effects, without showing any of the regrets, any of the shame, any of the hurt and woundedness, and it all goes kind of to your point that for a large part, contraception is being pushed, and yet meanwhile, like, none of the actual side effects or the consequences are also being presented. I think we need to pray for strong Catholic OBGYNs and doctors to be able to stand up and be able to present a woman who maybe really is in a difficult situation, whether it's conceiving, whether it's whatever, and to say, because now it's just like, without even thinking, the doctor will just write a slip like, here, you're on the pill. But to be able to encourage, like, there's actually a much more safe and non-harmful way to go about this situation that you're in, and yet it's just not even being looked at. The second prophecy, Paul VI argued that the man will lose respect for the woman and no longer care for her physical and psychological equilibrium, and will come to the point of considering her as a mere instrument of selfish enjoyment and no longer as his respected and beloved companion. So he's saying this in 1968. Talk about like the irony of the sexual revolution that promised women a greater freedom to be more free and being sexually active, both before marriage and after marriage, without being tied down to any of the consequences. And yet, ironically, all of a sudden, you look at what it's done to the men. The men all of a sudden aren't being held to the standard of being a man, of accepting the consequences of, no, if you want to have sex with me, you need to commit to life, because sex makes babies. I think it was Dr. Jana Smith who said, just think about it. How many people would you consider having sex with? She's like, okay, don't think too long. But think about now how many people you would consider having sex with if you knew that would lead to having a baby. And just like that little mental exercise at least helped me to consider, like, okay, maybe what would be like a vast, like, yeah, I'm attracted to a lot of people, but all of a sudden, like, to consider that act would lead to a life, then all of a sudden, like, that list goes down very low to, like, who would I actually want to consider having a child with? And yet talk about the two meanings of marriage, the unitive and the procreative, being totally divorced all of a sudden, all we see is the unitive. All we see is like, oh, I'm attracted to them. All this would be fun. All this would be enjoyable. And yet not even considering the reality that sex ought to lead to children. So yeah, does that lead to an objectification? Think about at the beginning of the course, we were talking about the gift that our bodies are. Just in the sexual revolution, that all of a sudden, especially women, are encouraged to see their bodies not as a gift, but more as a curse, something that's holding them back. The gift of being a mother and being involved in raising a child, no, that's keeping them back, and it's almost a bad thing. I don't know how you women were taught about even like your menstrual cycle. Sorry, this might be really weird hearing a priest talk about this, but like, were you ever taught that it's a gift? No, like, that it's a gift. It's the way that your body is telling you when you're ready to conceive life, and then, and when you're not, and even the pain and suffering that is even tied to the joy of giving life, and all those things is a gift that God allows you women to come into the beauty of bringing a life into this world.
Actually, they used to call it the curse.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
No, the big red curse.
Isn't that the curse today?
Yep.
Yeah. There's a great video. I was wanting to play it. It's about 10 minutes long. I won't play it now, but I'll at least tell you about it. It's called The Economics of Sex. The Economics of Sex. It was put out by the Austin Institute. And it's this awesome video that I want to give to every couple that comes to me wanting to get married who are already sleeping together. Because it really considers how what was just seen and appreciated before contraception was on the scene as a natural reality, especially from the perspective of a woman, that if you want to have sex with me, you need to commit to me. Because what this act means is that there could be a child. And that all of a sudden, when that is taken off the picture, then really the power that the woman had in calling a man to be a man has been reduced. And so the power that the women had in the economics of sex all of a sudden has been reduced, such that they've reduced what that gift is. They've reduced even that power that they have, such that now men are in control. And men are the ones who, for the most part, I don't want to say this. Yeah, I guess I don't have the words for it. But I think if we take an honest look, we would be able to appreciate that unfortunately, men are very much so in the driver's seat of using, taking advantage of the situation. Yeah, I didn't think that all the way through. I don't know. All right, let's move on to the third prophecy. He observed that the widespread acceptance of contraception would place a dangerous weapon in the hands of those public authorities who take no heed of moral exigencies. Just want to play a snapshot of a video that I found recently that I love. I thought it was, I've just never seen anything like it.
Go through the process of legalizing abortion. But actually, an overwhelming majority of the African people continue to reject abortion, even as surveys. I think Pew Research had done a survey a couple of years ago and found that
Is she talking that fast? You have it on high speed.
still continue to reject
Sorry, she is speaking that fast.
of legalized abortion. So I don't understand. As we talk about abortion, as we talking about contraception, they're two different things. If we're talking about abortion, well, I don't think that any Western country has the right to pay for abortions. In an African country, especially when the majority of people don't want abortion, that then becomes a form of ideological colonization, as we're beginning to see more and
But
more.
say if we talk about contraception, the fact remains that hundreds of millions of women don't have access and should.
Well, you're saying should, but who are you to decide, if you don't mind me saying?
Well,
Because there isn't a popular demand, man. There isn't a popular demand. If you go to Africa, what people are asking for every day, because I was born in Africa, I was raised in Africa, I continue to go to Africa many times a year. You just speak to any ordinary woman. I think contraception might be like the 10th thing she says, give that.
But it's a basic human right to have access to it. That's what I say, that they should have access. It should become available for them if they want it.
When
It
there
should
is
be
no
available.
food and there is no water, then if there is
And that is part of
limited
that
amount of
cycle.
aid.
But it is part of that cycle of poverty and dealing with poverty and overcoming poverty, is it
Well,
not?
that's kind of a Western solution, isn't it? But if the Africans are brought to the table, and the people are asked, the ordinary people, I'm not speaking about some doctor that works for some Western organization that is planted in Africa. If you speak to the ordinary woman on the streets of Africa, what is she asking for? She's asking for food. She's asking for water. She's asking for basic health care. And contraception continues to be like about the last thing that they would ever think of.
But does that not play into the wider conversation about poverty and food? If they have access to contraception, if they can deal with birth control, if they can have a family planning program in place, then it deals with the issues of poverty as well.
That is the Western solution. Why don't you listen to the people first? Now, talking about something like contraception, I always talk about contraception. The one thing that I have never heard of in all my time trying to track all these things is something like the side effects of contraception. No one ever tells the African women when they come to promote contraception across the different African countries. No one talks about it. Now, recently I spoke to some women in Africa who had contraception inserted into them. I think it was something like the IUD and the implanon. And these women were crying. I found myself consoling women who had actually been experiencing these side effects that they had never heard of before. No one ever told them. But someone from a Western organization, that is one of these Western organizations in Africa, came and put the IUDs into them and told them this is what you need to come out of poverty. That is not what African women need. That is not a single.
So you get the idea. Wow.
Praise God for people who refuse to be brainwashed by the lies that our culture tells.
It's an amazing thing, and sometimes it's like I don't think we know what we're doing. Like I don't think that woman is malicious in her desires, but this is what has been told to us, especially the last 50 years, strongly, that this is the solution. This will bring you out of poverty. This will bring like all these other it helps. And it's just like, oh yeah, well Africa needs this too. Meanwhile, like the strong families in Africa are just being destroyed right now, as the U.S., United Nations are coming in and saying like, here, we'll help you out of poverty. Meanwhile, like, okay, maybe they have more food and water now because there are less children, but the families are being torn apart right now. Talk about an even greater poverty than food or water, but that of actually like breaking apart love and the love of a family. Any other comments on this? If you look into investigate like Planned Parenthood, one of the realities is they know that contraception fail at a pretty significant rate. And for different reasons, maybe the contraceptive in itself, or maybe the human person, but there's a realistic error there. And knowing that failure rate, especially Planned Parenthood, has been pushing contraceptives even more, knowing that whenever it fails, they'll be coming back to them. They'll be coming back to them to pay money. And so Planned Parenthood has been pushing millions of dollars into providing women's health care in these third world countries. And in just a sick way so that they can profit off of it and take advantage of all the different side effects that the women aren't being told as the contraceptives are being pushed. So there's a definite agenda in all of it. The fourth prophecy, and the last one, the final warning Paul VI gave about contraception is that it would lead man to think that he had limitless dominion over his own body. This one, I don't know, I'd be curious to hear what you think. It might seem like a stretch, but consider that if the person in his body, in his sexuality, in his ability to potentially be a father or a mother is reduced, then all of a sudden even the very person is reduced in its dignity and its value. And so if that comes from contraception, then all of a sudden, yeah, something like making babies in test tubes is being widely accepted. Because the value and the dignity of the conjugal act and the not just like the goodness or the greatness, but the holiness of that is just reduced. It's just a biological reality. And so, yeah, we'll produce babies in test tubes. Euthanasia, if the dignity of the person is reduced at birth, why not at death? It's it seems to follow logically. How about use of organs for transplantation from the nearly dead? And there can be a generosity in it, absolutely, don't mean to take away anything like that. But all of a sudden, the dignity of the body can also very quickly be reduced to just, oh look, a field of organs that could go and, it's not a field of organs, it's a human person that is either close to death or has just recently died. And even the dignity of the body is just reduced for science or whatever. There were some positive prophecies in Humanae Vitae. Said an openness to life confers a higher human value. Just the opposite of what I've been saying. It helps both spouses to drive out selfishness and deepens their sense of responsibility.
He's just listening back there. He's peeking around the bottom of the chair.
Love it. So, the gift of being open to life is that every single time a husband and a wife come together, there's a recognition of this is a potential father, this is a potential mother. Our love is so real that it can bring forth the life. Does that bring a different perspective on the person, on the act? Absolutely. How about in the realm of natural family planning, where maybe there are periods for different reasons that it's not opportune to have a child, and the church asks that those be serious reasons. Well, that all of a sudden, without contraception, can be a very beautiful and fruitful time to talk and to come together and really to appreciate, especially from the man's perspective, like, what is going on with your body? What is this cycle all about? When are you fertile? When are you not fertile? And how can we come to understand abstaining for the proper times? And how can we come to then really talk, if we are talking through this? Okay, maybe it's been a month, 6 months, where we're using natural family planning, we're talking, all of a sudden, yeah, it's hard. And we go back and we talk about it again. And maybe we talk about, yeah, what were those reasons why we decided that right now wasn't an opportune time to have a child? I don't know, I'm a celibate, but I would think that'd be a really good, fruitful conversation to have between spouses, to continually to be talking about truly the meaning of sexuality, and truly the meaning of, and the vision of the family, and where God is in that too. Talk about an ability or an opportunity to pray together. Yeah, that can be a really difficult time. And yet to pray, and to go closer. John Paul II had a beautiful approach, and I leave it with you guys in this. His approach, and one of the things that took me 100 pages to write on, was the fact that John Paul II doesn't say that contraception is wrong because it leads to immorality. Contraception is wrong because it leads to abortion. Contraception is wrong because it leads to divorce and infidelity. And he said, actually, contraception is wrong because it fails to capture the fullness of what marital love is all about. So instead of like bashing contraception, he paints the whole picture of what I've been trying to do for 10 weeks, and maybe rambling on at many points, and talking about the free, total, faithful, fruitful love that a husband and wife are meant to experience, and what it means to truly be free, as opposed to the false freedom that the world offers, a true freedom that recognizes the responsibility that I have not only for myself but for my spouse, the totality of what it means to fall into the hands of the other person, to trust in God in the midst of all of it. A fruitfulness that brings life, that, yeah, all of a sudden children can become the greatest adventure that any person ever sets out on. And so that's what he does. He paints the whole picture of the beauty of marriage. And one thing that I didn't get to get into is the language of the body. And that the language of the body is meant to be one of being free, total, faithful, fruitful. So contraception is wrong because it fails. It fails to live up to that language that's meant to communicate all of that. A truly genuine and authentic love. So that's a lot, and there could be a lot more that's said on that. Any comments, thoughts, questions, objections, disagreements?
There's a lot of talk these days about rape culture, and
all of a sudden the like freedom of the hookup culture has been reduced, where there are signed consent forms that are handed out at major universities to avoid any question about whether or not it was consensual. Because there have been huge lawsuits that you've probably heard about and seen in the news, where one says, no, I said no, the other one says, no, you didn't, and all of a sudden, like, well, was it yes, was it no? Where there was drinking and alcohol involved, and I don't know if you realize this, but like, there's an implicit consent between married couples that's there, that it's understood, it's not in question. But all of a sudden, yeah, taken out of marriage, then it's brought into question. You can speak from the perspective of a man that my sex education from public school, middle school, high school, all the way through, was very much along the lines of sex is no big deal. There's no difference between your genitals and your elbow, right? And so all of a sudden it's just reduced, like, it's no big deal, don't make it a big deal. Well, then all of a sudden, this rape culture has emerged. And we're seeing, no, it is a big deal whenever it's violated. That the sexuality, that's something that's so personal and intimate, whenever that is violated, it leaves long-lasting marks and wounds. But how does that contrast to the like, oh, it's no big deal, it's no big deal, it's no big deal? Like, wait a second, is it or isn't it? Because like in our sex education, you're saying it's no big deal, but then all of a sudden, when it comes to this, you're saying, no, it is a big deal. You have to make sure that she's not this intoxicated, that she signs this paper, and then she says this, like, yeah, we've created a culture that has lent itself to great immorality and promiscuity and great hurt too.